All right, welcome back to another episode of Just Buy Less Coffee, answering the deeper questions of American politics. My name is Troy, aka Keep Troy Blue. With me, as always, is Kathy Cannon, aka Cannon's Fodder. Irene Pufferfish is not with us today. She's how would you say?
She's hungover. That's what she's hungover.
Indisposed.
Nope. I'm just gonna call her out and be like, "Bitch is hungover as shit." Rightfully so. She had friends in town. She's 20 something. You're allowed to do that.
We got a text this morning that she was violently throwing up, and my first thought was, "Oh, she's not feeling well." Like my fatherly instinct kicked in, and then Kathy's like, "You're hungover."
I was like, "No, bitch is 24. She's hungover." Troy had immediate concern, and I was like, "How much did you drink?"
I want to be 20 again. Reminder: we're streaming this bad boy. We're doing Monday because we have Kathy's got a conflict on Tuesday tomorrow when we normally record. So this is being recorded on Monday. We are streaming on YouTube to both the Upwire, which we have been on for several months now, almost a year, I think. Also to our new fancy YouTube page. Just Buy Less Coffee has its own YouTube page now, so you can literally just search YouTube for Just Buy Less Coffee. And you will find our very sparse, brand new YouTube page where you can watch all of our content.
I'm excited about that. Really,
we'll be streaming to both, live streaming to both for a little bit. We'll give you the heads up when we're coming off of the Upwire. There's no rush. We'll probably take a few more weeks before we completely come off the Upwire, but we're transitioning over to our own YouTube site. Just Buy Less Coffee YouTube channel. So subscribe to that. Get all your friends and family to subscribe to that. Just us, no one else. And all episodes will be broadcast live on that YouTube channel on Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern for the foreseeable future. So yeah, that's an exciting move there if anybody wants to head over there and subscribe to that. So so we've had some big developments in the world in the last couple weeks since we recorded.
All warm and fuzzy, right? All warm and fuzzy, all happy stuff.
It's gonna be a particularly warm and fuzzy episode. We're missing our apocalypse partner Irene today because she's so overwhelmed by the apocalypse. She just got ridiculously drunk.
That's the story. That's the story.
Yeah, that's the story. That's what we're Israel invaded by Hamas, attacking from the Gaza Strip in the south part of Israel, attacking civilians, killing babies, killing children, taking hostages. Israel ramping up a ground invasion of Gaza, essentially to destroy Hamas for good. We're going to get into a little bit of the history of the conflict later in this episode, and I think on Thursday I'll replay. We did an Israel-Palestine deep dive a few months ago. I think I'll just go ahead and replay that. If anyone missed it, sort of giving that was way before this, so no mention of the war, but it gives you sort of a good background on the conflict. So, what are your initial thoughts on this, Kathy? This episode's going to be kind of a downer, I think. But thoughts on this, because this is bad. This is really, really bad. This type of thing hasn't happened. This type of conflict hasn't happened in Israel for about 50 years. It was the last time there was a big war like this. But
well, they had a kind of a blow up in 14-ish. I mean, it wasn't this big.
They had a struggle in 2006, 2014. There were smaller ones, but not like this.
Yeah, this one seems to have blown up. There's a lot of what I'll say before I get into anything is that there's been a lot of fucking stupid reporting on this.
Oh yeah, so it's been terrible.
Yeah, and I've been fielding questions from the kids all week, right? Because they're 17. This is brand new to them. As far as they knew, our Middle Eastern problems were Iraq and Afghanistan,
right?
Which to me was almost charming when I realized that. I was like, wow, you didn't grow up with this. And I realized that we grew up with this. This was the Middle Eastern conflict that we were most familiar with prior to 9/11. 9/11 a little bit jarred us into, wow, there's more to the Middle East, And I feel like this is jarring them into, wow, there's more to the Middle Eastern conflict, right? So, interesting. I had to, like you say, we're going to later go into the whole history, and I took it back and I was like, because they were stressed about it to the point where I had to let them know that this isn't a new crisis developing. I literally said to them, I was like, I know you guys feel like you're on the worst possible timeline, but I promise this timeline had been going for a long time. And they said, how long? And I was like, well, the story starts back in 2000 BC with Abraham Like, just to
You
kind of
really you
give,
took it that far.
I did, like, just to give them an idea, and then I like fast forwarded like really quick to
I
like,
think we start with like the Abrahamic faiths and like the deep dive episode, like we really went.
because I mean, surely to get a whole picture of it, you have to. But like, but from there, I went. But like, if you want like the modern problem and where it came from, and I took them to the Ottoman Empire, and I got to
Yeah,
tell my fun story about how I had to learn about the Ottoman Empire. You know, keep it lighthearted for the kids, so they know that I struggled as a child learning about Turkish people and watching Lawrence of Arabia and all that fun stuff. Um,
yeah.
but
This
the
is. Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
the conclusion is I'm going to blame the British Empire for this one. That's
Yeah, I want to
basically.
get your British rant at some point. Just figure out a good time to do that and slide that in here at some
Oh,
point.
basically anywhere.
Maybe during the background portion of the episode.
Yeah,
But,
the 1917. I mean, like, I don't know. Like, I feel like the background is an episode all its own. Because there's just so much to it.
well, there's a lot to cover. Yeah, for me,
Yeah,
this is 9/11 all over again. Like you're talking about, like our
yeah.
generation kind of knew about all this growing up. I mean, growing up, the 90s again, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was one of the major conflicts of the
Mhm.
1990s. Peace accords in the 90s. It was a little bit different in the 90s. In the 90s, it was the PLO and Yasser Arafat, and it was more of a secular,
Yeah.
democratic sort of socialist movement in Palestine, as opposed to like a militant Islamic
Well, I
movement.
mean, remember, PLO started in the 60s as sort of a, I don't want to say like Hamas, but they
Right.
did have sort of like revolutionary, more, since you're talking about Ireland, more IRA style than
Yeah,
Hamas style.
yeah. Ireland and the IRA and the PLO were ideologically aligned allies, trained
Yeah.
together in Libya. They both received weapons and training from Gaddafi in Libya, both sort of on the socialist end of the spectrum, secular, not particularly religious in nature. The conflict, anyway. And Hamas was the PLO's enemy. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know how accurate this is. There's a lot of suspicion that the United States, armed Hamas, propped up Hamas to challenge the PLO. Because
Iran did that.
back in that era, we were siding with the. This was the when Osama bin Laden was on our team back in the 80s. We were siding with the Islamists over the communists. We really sort of decided that the Islamic militants were going to be our people because they were fighting the communists.
Yeah, but that was more between Iraq, Iran, and all of that area. Like,
Well,
I realize
Afghanistan
it's,
too. Like we backed
yeah.
Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan.
Yeah, so that, I don't think that was as tied to this, because like Israel and Palestine has always been its own thing outside of the conflicts that surround it, even when the conflicts that surround it spill into it, if
That's
that
true.
makes any sense.
It's definitely its own unique.
Yeah, because like especially with us supporting Israel right now, like I feel like that's the most inconvenient thing in the world. I realize that we're bound to by international treaty, like I get that, but also like right now, and I'm going to say something probably controversial, get myself in trouble here, but like supporting the Israeli government right now, and I want to make very clear that I mean the Israeli government, not the Israeli people. Like I support the Israeli people just as I support the Palestinian people. That it's like there's a bunch of fucking people caught in the middle of two very bad government groups fighting each other and killing each other, using people as pawns in their game, and it makes me crazy. But like our support for Benjamin Netanyahu's government in Israel is a little bit scary considering he's doing in Israel what Trump wants to do here. And it's going to get real sticky to support a version of it in Israel, but try to defeat a version of it domestically.
Well, again, we'll get into that in a minute. My thought on this is just, this feels like 9/11 all over again, where just on the right wing, every Muslim is a terrorist. Everybody, like you just said, everyone who opposes Palestinian genocide is a terrorist sympathizer. Like it is possible to side with both the Jewish people and the Palestinian people because both of their governments are ass.
Yeah, because it's two nationalistic, like ultra theocratic, dictatorial regimes fighting over the same plot of land and using their respective citizens as fodder in the battle.
I don't think the Israeli citizens are loving their government too much right now either, with the breakdown of intelligence and the lack of military support in the South for this invasion. Yep. Literally, I don't even think Netanyahu's visited the people. But listen, disagreeing with the policies of the Israelis, lay this out at the outset. Disagreeing with the policies of the Israeli government is not anti-Semitism. at all. Nor is disagreeing with the brutal actions by Hamas,
Yeah.
suggesting that all Palestinians support Hamas or all Palestinians are terrorists. I just think we should lay that out at the outset.
Yeah, like this is definitely one of those moments, and this is kind of how I try to explain it to the kids, is that this is one of those times when two things can be true at the same time, and you have to remember that. It is true that Hamas has done evil things to the Israelis and that that attack was disgusting and terrible, horrible, and uncalled for. But it is also true that the Israeli government has treated the Palestinian people awful and terribly for a very, very long time. Both of those things are true. And unfortunately, the people caught between them are the ones paying the price.
Mhm.
And it's heartbreaking no matter which way. There's no good guy finger
There's no
quote
good guy
in this one. There's two bad guys, and we picked our team 80 years ago, unfortunately, and we're kind of stuck on that team for now. Yeah.
I will say, let's get the gory shit out of the way first. I will say that this was an absolutely disgusting, despicable, horrific attack by Hamas. As a person that has supported Palestinian liberation for a long time, opposed the apartheid state in Israel, I got to say this is doing nothing for the Palestinian cause, the Palestinian people. This almost destroys the legitimacy, if it hasn't already. This could destroy the legitimacy of the Free Palestine movement. This was disgusting. We had babies killed. We had babies beheaded, burned alive.
Actually, I heard I'm actually glad you brought that up, and I want to jump right on it because there's been one reporter from the BBC who claimed that and has no evidence to support it, and it picked up so much steam and has gone so fucking viral.
The babies burned alive. There's pictures of it that have been
babies
confirmed.
beheaded.
Well, maybe not the babies beheaded.
Yeah,
but the babies burned alive has been confirmed by.
Yeah, because rockets set things on fire. Unfortunately, that's true. But the babies being beheaded went crazy viral, and I went hunting for confirmation on it and could not find confirmation on it. And I remember so very clearly after 9/11 too, right when the first attacks, sensationalized versions of stories come out. They hear about a building burning and babies and toddlers being caught in a fire and burned. And then they turn that into, and they keep snowballing it and just making it worse and worse and worse.
So you're saying it wasn't intentionally setting babies on fire?
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that it's you don't have to try to make this more horrible than it is to convince me that it's horrible. And making it exponentially worse every time you tell the story delegitimizes your cause, because when you start spreading a bunch of fake bullshit around, you're minimizing the literal terrible things that happened, because then nobody's going to, those babies just got caught in a fire because over here they're doing these things. No, those things didn't happen. You have to it's media literacy all over again, man. And that's what's scaring me the most about it.
All right. Well, despite the fact that it might not have been intentional, we did have babies killed and burned alive. And any movement which attacks civilians, attacks children, we had families, civilians kidnapped, taken hostage. In my opinion, any movement that intentionally attacks civilians has lost any sense of moral clarity, you can't attack civilians and expect your movement to, and no matter how just your movement is, you cannot attack civilians and intentionally attack civilians and expect
you lose your legitimacy immediately. We want to be on your side, but I can't be on your side. I can't support you doing that. I can't. And you said, it's gonna delegitimize the Palestinian cause.
And by the way, that's again on both sides. I don't draw a distinction between Israeli babies and Palestinian babies. I don't want babies killed, and I don't think that should be a fucking controversial thing.
Laying waste to the Gaza Strip and killing a bunch of kids, not great either. Not a great look,
not great at all.
And if you're not gonna be able to separate yourself from what you claim to be evil if you were committing the same evils.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be lost. Like, I see a lot of people supporting the very war crimes they're condemning, as long as the war crimes are done against the people they want them done against.
Well,
And that makes me want to set fires.
it's the dehumanization
Yeah.
and frankly racism of it, where
Mhm.
we've had a hard time viewing Palestinians as human beings, and I say we just meaning like
Like
American
the
media and
royal
American
way.
society.
Yeah. The royal way.
um, the American society and media has had a real hard time viewing Palestinian civilians as equal human beings in this conflict. So there is and that's a big problem with that's one of the big problems with the Israeli government's response, is they always do a non-proportional response whenever something like this happens. And they kill a lot of fucking civilians. I mean, there's
Mhm.
always more Palestinians that are killed than the initial attack on the Israelis, which is true in this case as well.
Yeah.
It'll end up being a lot more Palestinians killed than Israelis were killed. And we just sort of, again, we as a society just sort of brush that off, and it's like, oh
Mhm.
well, Palestinians and their plight is, it's whatever. They were gonna die anyway. They're living in subhuman conditions.
Yeah, but they don't have to be, is the point. Like,
Yeah.
why can't people get to the point where they realize they shouldn't be and don't have to be, and it's stupid that we're letting them. But
Yeah, well, it's an apartheid.
yeah.
Israelis have been an apartheid state for a long time, treating the
Yeah.
Palestinians very, 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 very poorly. And you just come to ask yourself, like, you live in these Palestinians, especially in Gaza, live in this horrific, horrific conditions, and they're living in this apartheid state and are denied rights by, they're denied right of travel and any sort of human dignity by the Israeli government. I mean, at a
Mhm.
certain point. The Palestinian militants are gonna, that's what they use for their recruitment. That's how they get people to sign up to do these horrific things. Now, that being said, again, any movement that intentionally targets civilians and children has lost any sort of moral high ground on
Yep.
that.
This is I'm curious as to I'm jumping a little bit because I realize that the
That's fine.
outline is here, but like when like this just kind of jumbles my brain because it's so
Well, this
deep.
is kind of an episode of like thoughts. So yeah, just
Yeah.
jump around.
Well,
Yeah.
because it's so deeply embedded in so much history. Like when I explain it to the kids, where does it start? Like 1000 BC, right? Like
Yeah.
it's tied up in a lot. And I've been thinking a lot about like the way to handle this moving forward, right? Like there's concerns with supporting Benjamin Netanyahu, like
Yeah.
uh, backing up, propping up, and like increasingly arming his military. Not a great look, not a great idea. But there's not really another option, I guess, if you will, based on
Right.
like our allies in the region. And Biden's like kind of claim to fame a little bit is his foreign policy chops here. And all I've been thinking is like, what is? Because you don't really win wars with warfare anymore. Like that's you're gonna like. There's only a diplomatic solution would be here. Because
Oh
if
yeah.
this goes warfare, it's just who annihilates who. Because
Well, it's
that's when this one ends.
just starting the next generation of conflict. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, now we're what was most depressing about this is now we're just back to square one, where it's like now we've got another 3 generations of people on
Well,
both sides that are just going to hate each other and fight. And
maybe. I mean, part of me
yeah,
wonders is because, like, when Hamas kind of took over in 2006, it pushed the PLO out of having like real influence in the Palestinian state, but it's still the PLO that's recognized at the United Nations.
well, the
Uh,
PLO runs the West Bank,
yeah, but
so they have kind of
the
a
occupied West
yeah,
Bank,
yeah,
like
West Bank.
completely occupied, and they are completely occupied because the PLO doesn't have any actual pull in like I don't know, you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
they got weakened by the rise of Hamas, if you will.
Hmm.
So I feel like the move here, and it's very 1990s of me here, right? Is there's got to be a way to push out Hamas and replace it with the PLO, give them authority over the Palestinians again, whilst also pushing out Benjamin Netanyahu and putting in better leadership in Israel and having like to find the deal where you can replace Netanyahu with somebody open to talks with the PLO to finally broker the peace agreement that Carter came close to, that Clinton came close to, and that we kind of forgot to bother trying for 20 years while we laid waste to 2 other countries in the Middle East, right? Like
Hmm.
there has to be a way to do that. And if anybody can do it, Biden could do it because he was there in the 90s, he was there in the 70s, and he's here now. So,
Yeah, speaking of, did you see that speech where he recounted the meeting with Golda Meir in the 70s?
Yeah, like, that's the
That
thing,
was
like, if you want anybody handling this right now, I hate to tell you, but this is the guy because he's literally been in the room all along.
that was a little bit glossed over, but I think that's absolutely incredible that he met Golda Meir Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir in 1973. The last time this happened,
Mhm.
last time Israel was at a full scale war,
But he was also,
and
like,
just
chair of the
like
d go ahead, sorry.
who else, like like Biden was there, man. Like Biden was there 50 years ago for the last one. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's like you
and he
kind of,
also
he's the right guy to be in the room.
exactly, he chaired armed services during the Yom Kippur War,
Yeah.
like, he's been
Yeah.
there for fucking ever. He's been in a room with Sharon, he's been in a room with Yasser Arafat, he's been in
Yeah.
a room with
He's met
Benjamin
everybody.
Netanyahu, he knows literally everyone, and, like,
Yeah.
somebody, I can't remember where I was arguing with somebody, but they were being critical that, like, oh, we haven't seen a whole lot of Biden after 9/11. George W. Bush was everywhere. And I
What
was
are they
like,
talking
yeah.
about? He's been all over the place.
I was, well, yeah, but this was like in the day, like the immediate days, like the 1-2 day after. And I was like, the fact that you don't see him means he's doing what he needs to be doing. That means he's on the phone talking BB down from fucking annihilating the Gaza Strip. And he bought us a week, but from what I see,
Which
there are streets
appears to
going
be
on that.
working. It looks like, or at least working somewhat. They looks like they've allowed water to come back on for a lot of residents in Gaza.
And I know they like
Um,
opened the door for evacuations, but
they're
then
doing
like
a
hit
little
the
bit.
roads during evacuations. I hate
Biden's big thing right now is just sort of urging,
restraint.
somewhat restraint on behalf of the, the official position is that Israel does have the right to defend itself, urging restraint, especially when it comes to attacking civilians.
There's
But we were talking about the
defending
PLO
yourself.
real quick there. So the president of the PLO, Mahmoud Abbas, who's been their leader for like 19 years, a total corrupt son of a bitch himself.
Mhm.
But he, I guess he said this week that, to your point, he said that the Hamas attack was completely unproductive to the Palestinian movement. So this is the PLO president in
Mhm.
the West Bank. He said Hamas's actions do not represent Palestinians, and
Mhm.
he called on Hamas to immediately release all hostages. So to your point, there is another branch of Palestinian government in the PLO that does not back this.
Well, I mean, arguably, all hostages includes the Palestinians being held hostage in the Gaza Strip by Hamas that won't let them leave
Yeah,
because,
exactly.
like, all hostages is Palestinian and Israeli alike at this point. And I think if the international message can start focusing, and then that's what I'm saying. Like, there is a Palestinian ally right there. The
Yeah,
problem is that Bibi won't work with that Palestinian ally when the rest of the world needs to be working with that Palestinian ally. And like that's
yeah.
I think the biggest problem standing in the way of a peaceful resolution to this is that Bibi is just as bad as Hamas. There, I fucking said it. And that doesn't like again, that doesn't mean that I don't think Israel should exist. They should. It's not saying that Palestine shouldn't exist. They should. There's a solution to be made here,
Hmm.
but you can't have rivaling dictatorial, theocratic, right-wing regimes fighting for the same land because the only way that ends is with one of them killing the other one as much as possible.
Well, like I said, was just catastrophic for the Palestinian cause because
Yeah.
the international community had it with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Mhm.
Israelis had it with Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel was
I
in the
know.
middle of a massive sort of uprising over Netanyahu's moves toward authoritarianism,
Mhm.
suspending the independence of the Israeli courts,
Mhm.
really, really making moves toward authoritarianism, corruption. They'd had
Mhm.
4 or 5 elections in the last year trying to oust Netanyahu. None of them worked. He's back in. Is like Israeli society was in the middle on its own of a massive anti-Netanyahu upheaval. The United States under Biden was not supportive of Netanyahu. We were looking for an alternative. The things were moving in a direction that would have seen this
Mhm.
Israeli apartheid state at least somewhat dismantled, at least in terms of Netanyahu's involvement. Who Netanyahu is, like, let's be here, like Netanyahu is a far right Israeli fascist. I mean, he is about as
Mhm.
far right as you can get
And that's what I'm
in
saying.
Israeli society.
It's gonna be really hard for us to be propping up an Israeli fascist whilst running against an American one. You know what I'm saying? Like,
But like, the Israeli people had come to see that and were standing up against Netanyahu. And now, so the timing was, this was the worst possible timing from a political sense for Hamas to do this, is what I'm getting at. Because now, 3 months ago, Biden and Netanyahu weren't on speaking terms. And now we've got the president of the United States in Israel backing Netanyahu, or at least backing, the Israeli people. So
it's backing the Israeli government.
Hamas really fucked this one up. But I do think, again, Biden being the right person. If it was Trump, if it was any kind of Republican, we would just be saying wipe Palestine off the map, commit genocide. At least with Biden, where we have a president that's standing with Israel, but urging a restrained response at this point, trying to protect civilians as much as possible.
Yeah, like that's the priority, is like save as many civilian lives as you can, but there's no good guy, and there's no good guy in charge of Hamas, and the guy in charge of Israel right now is hard to support, right?
Yeah.
And
Biden being supported by Israelis. 50% of Israeli households watched Biden's initial speech. He's getting a lot of support in Israel. There's billboards in Tel Aviv saying, "Thank you, President Biden." Secretary of State Anthony Blinken went to Israel, went to like a camp where victims were being housed, met with a lot of victims that survived the initial attack. So, Biden just doing a really good job of, again, standing with the Israeli people. Trump, for his part, gave a speech, or I don't know if it was a speech or it was one of his recorded video blog things. I think it was a video blog.
Probably.
Where he basically said that Hezbollah and Hamas were very smart. And basically, what happened was that, so now we've got this newfound friendship between Netanyahu and Biden. But what happened was that Netanyahu recognized the legitimacy of Biden's presidency and said that he won in 2020, which was enough for Donald Trump to basically consider Netanyahu, and those two had been allies, to consider Netanyahu to be like a traitor, a backstabber, not loyal to Trump. So now we've got Trump. If you're wondering how Trump would be handling this situation as president, we have literally Trump throwing Netanyahu under the bus just because Netanyahu said that Biden won the 2020 election.
Yep. And backing Hezbollah.
And praising Hamas. Now he's saying that Hamas and Hezbollah are very smart. That speech used in Iranian propaganda. The Israeli parliament called it shameful, called his comments shameful. Literally Iranian pro-Hamas accounts on Twitter using Trump's speech for their propaganda recruitment drives, essentially showing Trump saying that a lot of that speech was saying that Israel didn't really stand a chance against Hezbollah because Hezbollah would be smarter and had better leadership. So.
It's almost like, do you think that'll do it? My question is, it's like I'm going to see a bunch of right wingers' heads explode, right? Because especially the evangelicals, they've been literally programmed to support Israel. And they've been literally programmed to support Donald Trump.
To see it wiped off the map.
What? Well, yeah, there's that. But still, what happens now? They've been, part of their indoctrination is hate all of the brown people. And Hezbollah are brown people. And, Donald Trump is supporting them now. Like you said, this is old leftover 9/11 trauma. What happens when, the dear savior of the GOP is now supporting the people that they were brainwashed into hating for 20 years before they've been brainwashed into doing what he wants? Their brainwashing is going to start colliding, and God knows what that's going to look like. I'm almost scared to know, truthfully.
Yeah. Again, there was this sense that we've kind of moved. I mean, I guess I was naive, but there was this sense that we kind of moved past the whole Muslims are responsible for all the evil in the world. Because the right wing was trying to ally with Muslims. They were trying to say that, when you remember last week when the big boogeyman was trans kids, or people transitioning, they were trying to get Muslims on their side in their culture war against abortion and trans people. Now we're back to just hating all Muslim people again. So we're back 20 years ago to post 9/11.
Nostalgia.
Yeah, just right back where we started. Humanitarian crisis. obviously occurring in Gaza. Israel, not that it wasn't already completely cut off from the world, but Israel has cut off all support to Gaza: water, fuel, gasoline, electricity. Although I guess they are planning to
Yeah.
restore water to some Gazans.
Didn't like Egypt and one other country say they would start accepting Gaza's like citizens for asylum?
Yes. So let's see. I have it. So humanitarian corridor is still currently closed, not allowing Palestinian residents to flee Gaza. Opening the corridor has been subject of significant negotiations between multiple countries, including the United States, Egypt, Israel, and Turkey. So there's still the negotiations, I guess, which would allow humanitarian aid to come through Egypt, and then allowing refugees to flee Gaza into Egypt. So that's the biggest thing, though, is just like, all right, well, it's one thing to be like, do what Israel's doing and saying that they're just going to go after Hamas and just try to kill as few civilians as possible. And that's kind of like where they're at right now. But you've got to allow international aid organizations at least to come in. And you've got to allow refugees to leave. Otherwise, this is a fucking war crime. This is no different than what Hamas did. I mean, you're just intentionally sentencing Gazans to death. I mean, they literally cannot leave. Where are they supposed to go? They can't go to Egypt. Egypt won't let them in currently. Their only borders are Egypt, Israel, and the sea. And Israel has the sea blockaded. So like literally they're literally imprisoned in Gaza Strip, and they can't leave. So.
And what concerns me about this is, like I already saw like Ron DeSantis coming out with his like, we can't accept these refugees. The same way, if you remember when Bashar al-Assad was basically gassing Syrian civilians and they were trying to leave. And
we can't take in brown refugees, you guys.
Yeah, and like we're going to be right back to that again, like, and the irony of it is that the entire reason that they established, and by they I mean the British Empire, established the state of Israel is because nobody wanted to take in the Jewish refugees. Right? Like the first wave of Jewish refugees into Europe was a consequence of the the revolution in Russia, right? Like the communists basically outlawed all religion, not just the Jewish religion. And basically it was like, give it up or get out. So the Jewish, like Russian Jews left, and that made enough tension in Europe that fed the anti-Semitism that led to World War II, right? And all of that anti-Semitism continued to exist in Europe. So once they liberated the Jews, they didn't want them. So they literally stole some land from what was left over of the Ottomans, because if you remember, in true European fashion, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, they cut it up into pieces and said, here, France, here's some for you, right? Like, because that always works. See Scramble for Africa, see Berlin. It doesn't work, just for the record. So they basically, some of the British territory that they were holding had this land. They cut out a piece and said, here it is, Israel. Jewish people go there. And the Jewish people were fine with it because there was like the whole movement for Israeli statehood and all of that. So it's our lack of willingness to help people always later results in us needing to help more people that we hurt by refusing to help the first group of people.
Well, let's go into the history then there. So, I mean, you just kicked it off there. So basically, post World War II,
first
Allied
World War I.
Yeah, first was the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, for sure.
And that created like the British zone in that area, right? And the thing is that the British fucking Empire, being the British Empire, took the same little patch of land, right, that they're fighting over now, and promised an Arab state to the Arabs, promised an Israeli state to the Israelis, and then fucked off to let them figure it out themselves, basically. They were like, after World War II, they were like, all right, we don't want anything to do with this. And they handed it over to the UN, the baby UN, still in diapers, right? Like, this is the first like task you've given this new international organizations, just solve the Holy Land for us. And gosh, I can't imagine why it didn't work.
Yeah. Well, and then like during World War II, you had Allied powers promising, they went back and forth. At one point, they were favoring a Palestinian state and telling the Jews to fuck off. And then after the war, when it became clear what had happened with the Holocaust, then we switched tracks and like took all the land that they had promised to the Palestinians and just be like, nope, this is now Jewish land.
It wasn't even exactly switching tracks. It was like speaking out of both sides of our mouth.
Yeah,
They
it was
wanted
promising
a
everybody
promise.
everything.
Yeah, they wanted something that no matter who came out on top, they had made a deal with them. And it came about that they had to clean up their own mess and refused to and handed it off to the UN.
So initially conflicts, so Israel gets the land, gets the country, State of Israel, founded in 1949 as a secular democratic state, by the way.
But not all of it. They had cut it up into territories. They had created a two-state, like a very in favor of Israel two-state. They got the better land and more of it despite less population. But there were Palestinian territories, there were Israeli territories, but they immediately started fighting over them is the problem, right? Like a year, that was 1947, and a year later in 48, there was the what was it called? Where Jordan, Syria, and like came in. Like a year later, they're fighting a war, and then Jordan ends up occupying the West Bank, and then it's just back and forth for decades of the same thing, fighting over and taking back land from each other.
But initially, the major, conflicts. Global conflict with Israel was from the neighboring Arab states, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and a lot of there was a series of wars, and kind of the territory went back and forth, and Israel generally won all those wars and took a bunch of territory.
They won with the backing of dear brother America. Let's be real.
But that ended up with eventually they ended up with the current boundaries that they have today, which is an occupied West Bank, which was part of Jordan. Now is just occupied territory of Israel, where a lot of Palestinians live. And then what was until the early 2000s was an occupied Gaza Strip, which they took from Egypt, where more Palestinians live. So now you have Israel with basically two major Palestinian areas, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. In 2005, they held elections. The Israeli pulled settlers out of Gaza. They allowed the Gazans to hold elections. In one of the last time that the Israeli government made a sort of liberal move on this issue, they pulled all of their settlers out of the occupied territories and let the Palestinians in those occupied territories hold elections. In the West Bank, you had Hamas winning the election to govern the Gaza Strip. In the West Bank, you had the PLO, or whatever, the offshoot of the PLO. The
non-terrorist version of the PLO.
Well, they both had. That's the thing about Hamas too. Is Hamas back then had like what the IRA had and what the PLO had. They had the militant wing and then the government wing, the political wing. And back then Hamas they still do, but back then their political wing was much more robust, or at least they presented it as much more robust. They managed to win that election, and the Hamas political wing became and still is the government of Gaza. And they've done a horrible job. They've done a horrible job being the government of Gaza. They can barely handle things like trash pickup.
Yeah, it's almost like radicals and revolutionaries aren't equipped for governance. Who'd have thunk it?
Digging out like water pipes to build like rocket launchers and shit. But Hamas is an Islamic revolutionary group. They're very religious in nature, Muslim, caliphate driven organization. Making war on not just the Jewish state, but on Jews. PLO is, or at least historically, the PLO and the West Bank have been the sort of Palestinian nationalists, left-wing socialist sort of non-religious movement. So they were at odds with each other for a long time. They're not united by any stretch of the imagination. So. All that to say, a majority of the Palestinian people are not in Hamas, certainly. Majority of them do not even support Hamas. Hamas is not very popular in Gaza.
Yeah, and that's the point. You got two unpopular right-wing lunatic governments holding their respective civilian populations hostage. And it makes me sad, and angry and sad all at the same time.
As bad as the West Bank is, because it is an occupied territory and the residents there have to go through checkpoints and they have very little rights, Gaza has just been hell on earth. I mean, they have been completely sealed off from the world. Gazans have no international status. They can't travel. They get basically there's nothing. It's a tiny piece of land that's basically one giant city. They have very little. They have to get food shipped in, electricity shipped in. Hence why they're all kind of just basically cut off now, because all that's been cut off.
Yeah, like I
And they weren't
saw, like
allowed to leave.
smaller than Rhode Island with 2 million people packed into it, right?
Yeah.
And yikes.
Yeah. So it's been pretty bad over the years. Again, Israel let Hamas have the run of the place, and they didn't do a very good job. But again, Israel also basically restricting their movement and fencing them off and denying them basic rights, basic human rights there. So.
Yeah.
And now they're facing just basically genocidal extinction, because now they're not letting them leave, as we said before.
Yep.
So the casualties, so 2,700, as of this recording, 2,700 Palestinian civilians have been killed, including more than 700 children. On the Israeli side, 1,300 civilians have been killed. At least 29 Americans have been killed.
Is it 29 now?
Yeah, 29 as of this recording.
Mm.
And then the Israeli military has confirmed that at least 199 Israeli civilians are still hostages of Hamas, and at least, I guess it's at least 12 now. I was hearing 14, but it could be 12 to 14 Americans are being held as hostages. And that's obviously another priority of the Biden administration.
Yeah. Yeah. What is this day of rage? Sorry. I mean, I know I just jumped over like 2 points there. But what? like help? What?
Well, that's where we're at now, I think.
Yeah.
So the reaction in the U.S. So again, we've been covering it. It's just been absolutely despicable. But on the right and the left, I think that a lot of the, it's I think now is legitimate to come out and sort of stand with the Palestinian people and sort of as Israel ramps up this ground offensive and threatens genocide and cuts the Gazans off from the world as they prepare to invade. I think it's okay now to stand up and express support with the Palestinian people. But initially, the day of the attacks, you had people standing up and supporting not just Palestine but Hamas on the left, and it was really, or at least the timing of it was just not good. It just didn't look good. You had BLM sites posting, pro Hamas imagery and stuff like that. It just, again, not smart, not a good way to go about it.
I actually have thoughts on that one, if I may.
Yeah.
And I think it's because kind of what we were talking about at the top of the show about how this is brand new to like the kids as I'm explaining it to them. And what also is important to remember is that the kids have been very pro-Palestine and for a while. Like the ones that are tuned in have recognized what we were saying about Bibi, about how he's just an Israeli Trump is what they call him. And it's hard for me to correct them when they say it, right? Because it is not far off. And they have heard about the oppression of the Palestinian people from the Israeli government. That's the only version of this story that they're familiar with. Because like I said, while we were fighting Iraq and Afghanistan, this lost its like top spot in the news cycle a lot. So for younger voters, younger Americans, and younger people who are only getting tuned in now, they were seeing this from the perspective of Palestinian people that they've only known to be oppressed. They don't know the whole history of it, right? So that initial reaction to them, they see as people who've been oppressed going up against their oppressors, but with lacking like the historical and contextual understanding of what it is, and that Hamas is a terrorist group. I mean, there's not really anything else you can call Hamas, but they terrorize their own people. They're terrorizing the Israeli people. They are not a good organization. And I had to have like a whole sit down with them. And I was like, look, here's the whole background of this, right? And basically it had to go through, like I had to walk them back through Arab Spring and everything, right? I was like, how Al-Qaeda dissolved and splintered. And that gave us ISIS, Hezbollah, and Hamas. Like that's essentially where it came from. I was like, so and I was trying to explain, I was like, it's, I understand your support for the Palestinian people, but when you're approaching this in discussions with people, you have to realize that anybody 10 years, 20 years older than you equates this to what their greatest trauma was, which was 9/11, right?
Hmm.
And like you have to remember that a lot of these reactions are just latent traumas coming back because they were like Israel referred to it as their 9/11, remember?
Yeah.
Which I think immediately triggered those memories in people. And a lot of these reactions are just latent PTSD that we've never been able to cope with as a culture because we went straight from tragedy to war. And the war lasted so long that, like, and then it ended in the middle of another freaking catastrophe, right? Like, there's just been a lot that has gone on in the last 25 years in American culture and society that nobody's been able to actually process and reconcile, and it's all coming to blows at the same time. And
Right.
and especially in a country as dripping with cognitive dissonance as ours, a complicated, nuanced situation like this is really fucking hard to explain to people, you know?
Americans don't do well
We
when
don't
there's
do
no clear good
nuance.
guy. Well, they don't
Exactly.
do well when there's no clear good guy.
Yeah,
We
and
always want there to be a good guy and a bad guy, and sometimes there's
there's
just
no
not, man.
yeah, there's
Like
no good guy here.
usually there's just not.
There's a bad guy that we are like internationally bound to by legal treaty, and then there's a bad guy that we're internationally bound to by international treaty to fight. And you can have feelings about which side we ended up on, cool, but right now, legally speaking, we are
And
in a
understanding the Jewish psyche as it relates to Israel too. I mean, there's a lot of liberal Jews, a lot of not even liberal Jews. There's a lot of just Jews around the world that aren't, cheering for the genocide of the Palestinian people. But understanding the psyche of the state, what the state of Israel means, is that it is, after the Holocaust, after thousands of years of being displaced and murdered and oppressed, the state of Israel is a place where Jews do consider themselves to have somewhere to go.
well, some Jews do.
If shit hits the fan,
Yeah.
this was their place that was established for them, where they can go and be protected. So when you have genocidal moves like this, it really strikes a lot of fear into a
Mhm.
lot of people. And I think, the people that are cheering for Palestine right now at least have to have that kind of compassion. Again, not for the government of Israel, but for
For the
Israeli
people caught in the
citizens
middle.
and for
Mhm.
Jewish people all over the world, and understanding, what the state of Israel means to them. Now, again, that's not celebrating the actions of Netanyahu or the Israeli
Mhm.
government or the Likud party or any of the right wingers in Israel that have engaged in this apartheid society over the last several decades.
Yeah, and you'll find a hefty population of Jewish people that are not as, like, balls to the wall committed to an
Right.
Israeli state as other Jewish people would have you believe, right? Like, there's a whole movement within Judaism that
Yeah.
basically says
Yeah.
that you don't need a land to be like, the Jewish people are Israel. The land is not, right? And
Hmm.
it's just a matter of like where their theology has branched. But like the group fighting for Israeli statehood is and always has been a nationalistic
Hmm.
Israeli organization that has equated the faith and the country to the same thing. And that's a conflict within the Jewish community itself, which adds an extra layer of nuance because why not? Let's make it as complicated as we can.
Yeah. The idea that that not even all Jews would support the state of Israel would just blow people's minds. But
Yeah, like the number of Jewish people that would happily tell you the solution is a two-state solution. The solution is to give Palestinians authority over their own territory. Like, and remember, I grew up around a lot of Jewish people from Boca Raton, Florida, right? And all through the 90s. So this isn't a new conflict. It's not like I talked to them yesterday. Like back in 97, I remember a whole big conversation with one of my neighbors down the road. He was like 70 at the time, but how he was supporting Clinton's efforts with Sharon and it was it Ariel Sharon at the time and Yasser Arafat, right? For the
yeah.
two-party state.
Yeah.
I remember they were minutes away from it. But Republicans who were in the middle of impeaching him complained that Yasser Arafat was a terrorist, sabotaged the whole thing. It fell apart, and here we are.
Well, but prior to this, the argument that we were making was that, look, this is not sustainable. What Israel is doing is not sustainable. Like you need a two-state solution or a one-state solution. You've either got to give Palestinians their own country and just let them go, and not be an occupying force in an apartheid state, or you've got to integrate Palestinians into your society and be an actual democracy. You can't be a democracy if you have a portion of the population that are clearly treated as second class, not even just like metaphorically second class citizens, like how we talk in the United States, but actually second class citizens where they don't even have the right. They don't even have the right to freedom of movement. You know, you had to do one of the two things. You had to give them their own country or fully grant them citizenship in your country. Where that goes now is, you know, God knows. I think at this point, you know, the Israelis are just going to be wiping Gaza off the map. And
no, I mean, I don't know about that. I think, I mean, I still want to think that it is possible to create that two-state solution. The problem is it won't happen with this current Israeli government. And the thing that scared me the most is in the immediate aftermath, right? It came up like opposition came and formed like a cooperative government with Netanyahu to get through the crisis. And like my only hope, okay, and this is I'm going to say something really stupidly controversial. Are you ready for it? My only hope here is that America, remember, we're really good at regime change, and I've been against it for a very long time. But like I remember protesting the Bush administration and them going into countries and replacing leaders. But if we have any of that energy back, now is the time to do it with Netanyahu. And you don't have to do it with like killing him the way we used to, right? We can do this in a more grown-up way.
You suggesting we invade Israel?
No, I'm not at all. What my thinking is just in the spirit of that leader isn't going to work. Instead of Reagan era, Bush era, go in and assassinate them. How about you get that coalition government, that's the word I couldn't find, that Netanyahu has now had with his opposition, and like a subtle coup is what I'm getting. Right? Like a subtle coup where you get like the more reasonable members of the Israeli government with the reasonable members of the Palestinian, like the PLO, right? And like after we settle the immediate conflict, figure out a way to oust Netanyahu with elections. We can do it with elections. I'm fine with elections. They're great. I love them, right? And then put somebody in charge of the Israeli government who doesn't have goals of wiping Gaza off the map, perhaps, because we know that's Benjamin Netanyahu's goal. Like that's the only
goal for a while.
Yeah, like that's the only solution he's really going to be happy with. So leaving him in charge of this is not a great plan, you know, like just not a great plan.
I don't think he'd win the next election. He is not. There's a lot of really pissed off Israelis at Netanyahu right now,
and that's what I'm saying.
And they already weren't super big fans of him before this happened. So.
That's why I'm saying it's going to have to happen in the Israeli parliament. You're going to have a low key, like kind of like oust the speaker, if you will, right? Like talk to Matt Gaetz, ask how he did it.
That's what we're too sooning. No, but
the
problem with Israeli politics is that you've got 13 political parties, and you've got Netanyahu's party is, you know, there's a lot of people who don't want Netanyahu in charge, but they've completely split their coalition between like 5-6 candidates. And that was when in the last election they figured that out, and they ran Benny Gantz as sort of the coalition anti-Netanyahu candidate. And he won. After like 4 elections, he won, but the coalition couldn't get their shit together. It fell apart, and Netanyahu took power again. So now we have in this conflict, we have what they're calling a war cabinet, where Netanyahu has joined forces with Benny Gantz and the opposition. And it's sort of like they're calling it a unity government, a war cabinet. But to be clear, like Benny Gantz is also on the right side of the spectrum. He's not as corrupt as Netanyahu is. He's not a Trump. He's not an authoritarian. But I don't know that he's any better for the Palestinian people. I mean, he's former army, or even I think he might be even current army.
They're all. I mean, they're all former. Like that's like Israel requires all.
He was like a general. But he's
he's
not a Palestinian sympathetic guy by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, none of them really are. But the point is he more open to diplomatic negotiations? Is he easier to talk down? And I'm going to argue, because we've been trying to talk Benny Boy down for 2 decades now, and we're still here. So
you mean Benjamin Netanyahu?
Yeah,
because the other guy's also named Benny.
Okay, BB and Benny. That's gonna have to be it then.
Yeah, I like. But I think you're right. I think the solution, now that you've got a boss and the PLO and the West Bank making overtures, like they're not going to jump in and start fighting too, because we weren't sure like the first week of what was going to happen. Like, was the West Bank going to explode? Was Hezbollah going to invade? But it's looking like the West Bank, at least for the time being, is not fucking around with Hamas at this point. They don't want any part of this. So, or at least in the leadership, God knows what people on the street are saying, but at least in the leadership in the West Bank, they don't want to have any part of this Hamas attack. So you do have maybe a natural alliance forming there, where the West Bankers can some sort of save up their territory by making a deal with the unified government or whatever. But the point is that things have gotten really, really bad, and they're probably going to get a lot worse before they get better.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. It's super fun. I'm having a blast over here.
In terms of World War III, we had this conversation the other day. I think, the worst case scenario would just be for Iran to attack Israel directly, which I don't think they're stupid enough to do, because then we would have to respond directly to Iran. Iran's biggest ally is Russia. Which, by the way, don't discount the fact that Hamas is armed and funded by Iran. Iran is armed and funded by Russia. So I don't think you're being paranoid by saying that Russia had a big hand in this. But
it is going to fuck up Republicans in Congress who want to simultaneously support Israel and not Ukraine when those two conflicts are now I can't think of the word, but tied together.
Intertwined or something.
There you go. That's the word I was looking for.
The cognitive dissonance is, I mean, I guess it shouldn't be astounding because they're not bright people. They're not intelligent, or at least they're not nuanced people. Yeah. But the cognitive dissonance to support Israel but not support Ukraine when both of their enemy is Russia.
They're funded by the same people.
By the same fucking people is incredible to me.
Well, they're still working on electing a speaker. So, they
can't even agree to adjourn for the weekend. They have to just walk out because they can't get a vote to adjourn.
Bro, that is the biggest shit show. Like, speaking of giant shit shows, and that's the other thing that concerns me, is our government is a fucking circus right now. So who is going to take us here? Like, America comes in to try to clean this up, and they're going to be like, yeah, that's adorable, right? Like, it's like a toddler coming in with finger paint saying, me help you clean. No, you really won't. But that is what America looks like right now. Toddler covered in finger paint trying to clean the house.
Well, we only got a couple minutes left, but a brief update on the speakers. So we had Jordon and Scalise.
Yeah, we don't have is the brief update.
God knows what's going to happen. Jordon and Scalise were the candidates last week. Scalise dropped out after a 24-hour shit show. He didn't beat the lettuce, Kathy.
I know. You know what? I was literally in class in front of my kids, and I have to confess this. That little alert popped up on my phone, and I went, "Oh shit!" Out loud, exactly that. And the kids went, "What?" And I was like, "All right, I'll tell you." I just gave the whole story. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Shit show.
So Scalise is out. Jordon took another vote. He beat Congressman, who the fuck? I don't know who the hell that guy was.
Or other, I think his name was.
I think he was just running for publicity or to put pressure on Jordon or something. I don't know.
Representative Irrelevant is who he is.
Yeah, Mr. Irrelevant running there. But anyway, Jordon won the nomination with the majority of the Republicans in their closed conference meeting. Then they took a second vote because they realized after the Scalise debacle that it doesn't matter if the person has a majority, just a simple majority of the conference. If you're going into it with only a 4-seat majority lead in the House, they need basically unanimous support from the entire conference in order to actually pick a speaker. And they didn't have that figured out last time. So they decided to actually cover that this time. And they took a second vote. So, okay. So now Jordon's our nominee by majority vote. How many of you are planning to actually vote for him once it comes to the floor? The official vote on the floor, 55 Republicans said that they were leaning either not going to or leaning not going to vote for Jordon when it got to the floor. So he's had to whip. He can't afford to lose 5. He has 55.
So he's got a lot of whipping to do.
He's got a lot of whipping. If it's too bad Irene's not here. She could tell us about it. But
too bad he's not in that locker room.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Yeah, I went there because he's disgusting and people need to know about it.
He is pretty disgusting. But this shitty thing is, Kathy, it looks like he might actually get there. There are a lot of the moderates that were hell no people a couple days ago are folding. He's got to be in back rooms just promising these people all kinds of pork for their districts or something, because there's a lot of moderates. But he still has so many people. He can only afford to lose 4 people. And there's so many people that can't stand Jordon in the House.
I don't think he'll get it.
I don't think he'll get it. They can't stand him. I think they'd rather have Hakeem Jeffries.
Yeah, I feel like he might get from 55 to 35 maybe, but he's not gonna Kevin McCarthy. took 15 ballots, and he is way less controversial
Yeah.
than Jim Jordon. I'm sorry, right?
Yeah.
And there's at least 8 Republicans that I know of. I can't think of their names right now, but 8 that have come out and said never Jordan. Like,
Yeah.
and you have to get half of the never gonna vote for you people to vote for you. And I don't see him doing that.
That by tomorrow. That's a lot of whipping. But yeah,
of
McCarthy had much better numbers going into the floor vote than Jordan does. It
He's
took
not gonna get
15
it.
ballots.
The problem
Yeah.
is like there's no leadership in the Republican caucus. And like I said, like the magical daydream is, could it be Hakeem Jeffries? And I still don't want to say it could be, but truthfully, what is the other option turning out to be? Like,
I don't know. For Republicans, I don't know. And Hakeem Jeffries floated the idea of a bipartisan coalition in the House, which is not something that we usually do in the United States, where like it would be basically the majority would be a coalition of moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans, basically.
Which wouldn't be a bad idea.
Which would be probably the best idea. Democrats are also floating idea of giving temporary powers to the pro tem speaker McHenry on like 15-day intervals, just so he'll be able to call votes on Ukraine funding and Israel funding and keeping the government open, because we do have the government shutting down in 15 days. So
yeah, I know.
When they don't have a speaker.
Stripes. Just yikes, stripes.
But what will probably end up happening is if they'll go for this Jordan, they'll go for Jordan and give him a couple ballots. And if it doesn't look like it's going to be Jordan, they'll probably end up nominating some dark horse moderate that everybody can get behind, as someone who's never heard of, some moderate Republican that can get a few Democrats to vote for them.
The reason I know that, or the reason I'm confident that it can't be or won't be Jim Jordon, is because we have a government shutdown coming up, and those 8 moderates know full well that if he has the speaker gavel, he'll leave the government closed until the 24 elections, and he wouldn't care how much damage that did.
Yeah,
because
they hate him.
But like he wouldn't care how much damage he did, because his goal is to do damage. Because you want my opinion, he does not work for the American government. He works for the American government, but he doesn't work for, you know what I mean? He is a traitor.
Hannity sending out pressuring emails to moderates telling them to vote for Jordan. So now you have the Fox News sort of state media apparatus kicking in, where you have like Sean Hannity is the official like media partner of the Trump organization, and now they're pressuring for Trump's pick for speaker, Jim Jordon.
But Trump has burned a lot of bridges. Like, I know outwardly they support him, but like he's a chaos candidate. And like, if I were a moderate Republican, especially the ones that have been there for like 2 decades, like I know we all hate the fact that they've been there for 2 decades, but if I'd been there for 2 decades and this was about to be my legacy, I don't know. I would break and try to save my own ass. It's just me.
They're sick of the chaos. They're sick of not being able to get anything done.
Yeah, this isn't the Republican Party they want to be part of, and this is their last chance to save it, because if it keeps going this way, it's irredeemable. It's the modern Whigs.
God willing.
Yeah, right.
We say moderate just because they're not Trump, cultists. They're not moderate.
By moderate,
politically.
We mean George W. Bush, right? Like
they're not moderate politically. They're still right-wing conservatives. They're just not in the Trump cult. So like they're wanting to pass a right-wing conservative agenda that they can't get past because the fucking MAGA, crazy caucus is.
They just still at least like the Constitution, which you can't say for the rest of like a good number of Republicans do not like the Constitution.
Yeah.
And that
Jordan represents the branch of Republicans that don't like the Constitution.
Yeah, and that should get more attention than it does, but the media. So
the other thing is that people just don't personally like him. He's got a very combative style. He's a grandstander. He's just in it for TV time.
He's got one of those voices that just makes you want to punch a person,
He's not gotten a single bill passed in 16 years. Nobody likes the guy. Like, he's been in Congress for 16 years and not a single bill that he has written or sponsored has passed. So he's just
give him the speaker gavel, like the least effective representative. Jesus Christ.
Now he's responsible for getting all bills passed.
Yeah, that's gonna go great. It's gonna be
as if he would be willing to compromise. But
I'm gonna get in my aunt's suitcase. My aunt's coming from England. I'm just gonna hide in her suitcase and let her take me back. Like, just take me back.
Come with us to Ireland, man. I'm telling you.
I know the UK is broken too, but it's not this broken.
Yeah, they got their own problems for sure.
Oh man,
we are just about out of time. Thanks everybody for joining us on this very sad, somber edition of Just Buy Less Coffee. Thank you guys. Thank you, Kathy, for your very brave comments and for clearing up some misinformation. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I want my final remarks to be that remember, there are innocent people on the Israeli side and the Palestinian side paying the price for all of this. And you can support the Israeli people and be critical of their government, just like you can support the Palestinian people while being critical of their leaders, because the people at the heart of this are victims of both sides. And that is what I don't want to get lost.
Dead children are bad.
Dead children are bad no matter where they come from. How about that?
I don't care if they're Israeli children. I don't care if they're Palestinian children.
Let's not blow up apartment buildings and hospitals. I don't care who your boss is. It's not okay.
Yeah, let's not.
I don't care what treaty we signed with you. Don't blow up hospitals. I can't defend that.
If you want to go in and wipe Hamas off the face of the earth, fine. You've got to allow international aid organizations to come in and get refugees out and get healthcare to people that need healthcare. You cannot cut people off from their basic human rights, or you are a war criminal and you are no better than the people that you are no better than Hamas.
Yeah, and this is what I'll say to the right wing. Yeah, to the right wing flank in this country that wants to wipe Hamas off the planet. How about this? I'll give it to you if you allow 2 million Palestinian civilians to come here.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let you lay waste to fucking the whole Holy Land. I don't give a flying fuck, right? Do what you want as long as you let all of those innocent people come here and let us take care of those innocent people. If you're willing to help the people the way your Jesus tells you to.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty sad. Pretty sad situation. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Remember, we now have our own YouTube channel, Just Buy Less Coffee. Head on over there, subscribe. You'll get all of the same content, video content that you got on the Upwire. So you just won't have to sift through a bunch of other stuff to see our stuff. Not that the other stuff was bad. A lot of it was really good, but now you can just see us. We'll still be streaming to Upwire live Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. As well as to the new channel. We'll be streaming live to both, so you can go to either spot. However, to see us live on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. However, go ahead and subscribe to that Just Buy Less Coffee YouTube page. We're going to be phasing out the Upwire. We'll be on there for a few more weeks, so we'll let you guys know. So head on over to Just Buy Less Coffee on YouTube, subscribe, and you'll be able to continue to catch our live streaming 6 p.m. on Tuesdays. We had an off day today because Kathy has prior engagement for tomorrow, so we're recording this on Monday. Irene is hungover, that's why she's not here, catching everybody up. I can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry, I didn't know I was muted. I was like, I hope she's not mad at me for telling everybody that, but like, it's cute. It's cute.
She's not much of a drinker. It's a rare moment when Irene is that.
Which is probably why she got hungover.
Yeah.
Lightweight.
Yeah. Check us out. Listen, if you're listening to us on the audio only podcast directories, Apple, Google, Spotify, make sure you're clicking that download button. Downloads are how we're ranked with other news and political podcasts. Again, you can catch the audio versions wherever you get your podcasts, video versions on YouTube on a channel called Just Buy Less Coffee. Subscribe to our Patreon, patreon.com/Just Buy Less Coffee. Subscribe, $5 a month. Get access to behind the scenes footage and merch and a few other extra goodies. I think we're going to go ahead and probably air the deep dive Israel-Palestine deep dive that we did earlier this month. Again, that was pre-conflict. So no mention of the conflict in that one. It's just a very, very broad overview. I think we even went back to
it's the historical, how we got here.
This version will be, this episode will be available to view, and then also the Thursday deep dive episode this week. So again, catch us Tuesdays live, 6 p.m. Eastern. And then if you don't catch us live, the video stays up on YouTube for the rest of the week. So thanks everybody for joining us today. The small but mighty crowd that found us on Monday. Thank you guys for coming out too. Thank you, Kathy, for a great conversation. And we will see everyone